Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Family Law, Season 2, Episode 4. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So, this episode kind of heavily deals with like a lot of like it feels like this is going to be the relationship season, but I guess, why should I be too surprised? It is about, the entire show is family law, but I feel like this is the most, it feels like this entire season is going to revolve around relationships kind of ending and stuff kind of beginning anew, because, especially because like a lot of the first season was more like familial relationships and complications. Now it's like husband, significant others, like Harry's kind of going through his breakup. Obviously, Daniel's putting himself out there. Abby's going through her divorce. Lucy's in her complicated situation that may lead to divorce, it seems. So, and I even love that it comes up in the episode where it's like, yeah, it seems like from what we've seen amongst the main cast and recurring characters, Jerry, she seems like she's the only one that's in a good relationship. Everyone else's relationships is like fizzled and burned out, despite how they've met their significant others, because everyone's judging Daniel for like how because he was talking about dating through like a mail order bride situation and kind of calling it almost like legal prostitution or whatever, but they were kind of like, Lucy and Abby were kind of pushing back on him on certain points, but it's also like, yeah, but he's like, look at your relationship. The only person here with a good relationship that hasn't burned out and fizzled is Jerry. So either way, that in itself is the main overarching story to this episode. Involves Jim and Ilanka. I don't know why I said Ilanka. It's Karolinka. She is a mail order bride. They try to stay away from that term, but that is what it is. I don't know if that's the term that even gets floated. Maybe that they do try and like not use that word anymore. Like it might be a very like antiquated term, but it is like they still use it in the episode. But it's like I never think about, because I never hear the term mail order bride as much anymore. It's probably out there. Just I've never come across it in more recent years. But growing up, like I remember hearing that term, a bit like here in TV shows and stuff. But it's like, yeah, you married someone from a different country and it benefits them because hey, they get a green card in whatever country they're living in. But if they are married long enough, in this particular case, she has to be in the country for 2 years to be able to legally have like a green card status situation. And that's what Abby's trying to, like, they wanted to try and hook her up with a situation where, hey, she could get divorced, but like the proceedings could take such a long time, they could stretch it out over the course of 2 years so that even when the marriage is dissolved, she could still legally stay here in Canada. But the problem is that Jim wants to cut that off immediately, because their plan was like, if we do this, it makes it so that Jim won't have to do any. Well, I think there were two separate plans, because I think the second plan was like, right, we'll do something that makes it so that Jim doesn't have to like financially like, because if they do the long divorce route, unless they like getting it annulled means he has no financial thing of like he has to support her, but the long divorce route, he would still have to like support her almost like in a more, I guess, traditional alimony sense, because they've only been married for like 2 months. But it turns out the reason why is because Jim is on his like anti-feminist bag of like, like a wife has a very specific duties and stuff like that, which that, playing into a larger conversation about people being like, oh, women should be more traditional values, and like, why do people fight back against this traditional thing of like what a wife and mother and woman should be? But it's like, that's putting someone in a box. Yes, some people might be fine with that, but other people don't. Like, they want to keep things free flowing, that the definition of like a wife isn't just, because it's a very antiquated way of thinking. But it's like, yeah, because even Karolinka's like, you want me to be your cook and all this, and I'm like, I'm not your maid. It's like, oh, you spend all this time watching these shows. She's like, I'm learning English. And it's like, they've consummated the marriage like pretty early on, but there hasn't really been anything since. And it's just, there's even moments that even his lawyer had to go like, stop it. Well, if you're like, how far, he's going with just kind of like, yeah, it's like he wanted a wife that would be, because she's even like, dude, I don't go anywhere. Even later on when she's like, hey, I'm pregnant. He's like, how do I know it's mine? She's like, who else's would it be? You literally don't let me go anywhere else. I thought that was interesting. I mean, and it's sad too because at first it's just kind of like, all right, it's kind of this nasty divorce situation. Nasty because if it doesn't work out, she will get deported. And the entire time that she didn't fall in line and didn't fit the picture of what he wanted for a wife, like without that, if she stepped outside of that bounds, he would throw, get you deported in her face. And that is a sad like power move in that situation of like someone who knows no one else in this country, all her family's back home, and she even says like a lot of her family is riding on her to make this happen, because it's like, right, if she does this, it means that she can make it so that like her siblings can eventually come over, like they can kind of find us, like, you know, they could kind of get brought over because of her being here for a while and having her green card and everything. So it's like, man, that I was like, that sucks, dude. I'm curious what Canada's laws are like with the green card situation versus like the U.S. Like you hear stories in this about, you know, the visa green card situation from people like when they come to this country. I wonder what it's like compared to other countries, but because I never really thought too much about like what it's, because I always, you know, I have the very U.S. centric perspective of hearing about what it's like kind of getting a visa or a green card situation here in the U.S., but I've never really heard it too much about like other countries, obviously. So this is the first time I've ever really heard that kind of tackled a bit. And you know, obviously this is a Canadian show, so obviously they would have that perspective on it. But either way. But when it was found out that she was pregnant, and this early in the pregnancy, the only way to figure out paternity would be risking to the baby, which Karolinka didn't want to do, and Jim didn't want to do either. It's like, right, but it's like for him, it's like, because it's like, oh, like they can work this out. Karolinka's happy about it because it's like, oh my God, like we get to be a family. That's what I wanted. Yes, I came here for a green card, but I also came for love. But then like Jim is like, okay, but if that means we're having this baby, that means you're going to fall more in line. And she's like, yeah, I'll learn how to cook and do all kind of like, you know, I'll be a mother. So it's just kind of like, it still has that little ick factor to it because of Jim being like, so that means you'll follow your more wifely duties now. And it's like, yes, it's like, okay. So, but he ended up getting her, wanting to call it all off when he heard some messages from her. She was calling her quote unquote brother. It seems like she was saying later on, it's kind of revealed to be like, I guess her ex-boyfriend, but they were kind of having phone sex. And it's like, wait, why was that recorded in the first place? Which is kind of weird. I don't know whether it was like on her phone or what. Like, we didn't really cover it. I wonder, was that cut from the episode or whatever? Maybe it was just never tackled. But I'm like, are we not going to bring up the fact is like, wouldn't that count as like wiretapping or something like that? I don't know. That's weird. Like recording. I guess I don't know, man. I don't even know what Canada's rules are on like wiretapping, because I know that varies from like state to state here in the U.S. Because I know like California and New York have very, I think, opposing. Like one state has it like, oh, you only one party needs to be aware. Another one's like, no, both parties need to be aware you're being recorded. But I'm like, they kind of brushed over like the whole like, oh yeah, this was recorded. I'm like, how did he record that? And why was he recording? Does that mean he records all of her calls? Like maybe it's like, it's an invasion of privacy, but it's not illegal because you're married. I don't know. So that kind of null and voids the whole situation. And now they are trying to, well, ultimately, Abby got the idea to go back to the person who runs like the mail order bride situation. It's interesting too because she has a very distinct perspective to the person who runs the business, because for her it's like she is in that same situation herself. She was a mail order bride and it all worked out. Like, you know, it's like for her it's like, right, getting like kind of like a green card situation comes first and foremost, and then you kind of find love after. And she's like, yeah, I've been married to my husband for like 40 years and I love him. You know, but it's also like, it's a little, you know, not every situation is going to work out like that. It's kind of her perspective on it, but it's like, maybe your perspective on it, it's a little bit blinded by your own circumstances where you're not willing to kind of step outside of your situation. She feels bad for anyone where things just kind of don't work out, but they don't work out. I mean, especially look at Abby's case of like, yeah, her situation isn't, you know, it's not a mail order bride situation, but her relationship and her marriage is kind of falling apart, which we'll get to later, but not even kind of falling apart, it is, you know, because they are getting the big D word, divorced. But she does later on help out with Karolinka, because it's like, right, it turns out Jim has other mail order brides, like Caroline is in the first one. He kind of, and Abby kind of put it very eloquently, of he treats these women like they're t-shirts of like, oh, this didn't work out, so I'm just going to immediately toss you back to the manufacturer. Because in the like the marriage clauses or whatever, it's like, oh, they have to obey. It's like a very antiquated, like I think Abby was saying, like, right, that has kind of been removed from like the marriage vows and stuff, like the legalese of marriages. Like, it's not like that obey element to it. He's like, no, I didn't mean like obey. But yeah, even the judge was like, he's deplorable and disgusting with his behavior, the way he kind of treats women like that, where it's like, right, he knows that he's just gonna like try them on, and like, oh, they don't fit, he'll just toss them to the wind. It's like, you're kind of using these women like that, because he's already lined up the next person he's getting after Karolinka. But the judge is like, he's a douchebag, and disgusting douchebag, but nothing illegal is going on here. So Karolinka's in a very bad place. She tried to go to the church to get like a seek asylum. I thought what was going to happen, and it didn't, because they were Svensson and Simpson have been dealing with like their new temp person who's replacing Nina, but because Nina's a very like bubbly personality. She's very like, she's the ray of sunlight that she is. But then like the new temp is kind of like, apparently Cecil is doing her job, and even Abby's like, why are you doing her job? Cecil's like, she finds you very intimidating. I was like, is that why the situation is played out the way it's like? Yeah, has she avoided doing her job specifically because of Abby? I'm like, I mean, I wonder, did they have any, once again, you never, like, there's at least a minute or so, there's at least one scene cut for them show. So I don't know in that scene, did Abby have an interaction with her that kind of was like very negative or something, and because of that she's been avoided. Like, ever since the beginning of the episode, she's been just kind of like, oh yeah, like, I mean, maybe she's doing that to everyone in the Svensson family. Maybe she's been doing that to Daniel, to... But anyway, getting back to my point, I thought Karolinka was going to be their new, like, Nina, essentially. I was like, oh, that'd be kind of... But it turned out not to be the case. I mean, especially when they were like, oh, do you have any, like, skills or whatever? Because, like, that could be your way to stay in the country. But it was like, no. She's like, I don't have any actual skills or whatever. And I thought that's what was going to end up being the case. But at the end of it all, Abby ended up getting her a job at the mail order bride place. So... I even love at the very end, you get like a picture sent, Abby got a picture sent to her of her working at a new place. Her boss is just kind of like, but Karolinka's just so happy because obviously she gets to stay stuff. I thought that was kind of neat. So it kind of has like a happy resolution, despite everything, but obviously Jim is probably going to continue doing, the Jim thing that he's been doing. So, I don't know if we'll catch up to that at all, but I thought that was kind of neat. And obviously like how that all personally ties into, I mean, just like all these cases end up doing, especially last case, ended up flowing into what Abby's going through right now, and that's a divorce. Her and Frank had to have to sit down with Nico and Sophie about, hey, this is what's happening. Which Sophie's older, she gets it immediately, like, okay, you guys are getting a divorce. But for Nico, he's having a harder time being like, okay, you messed up and Dad messed up, but why can't you work things out? And for, it's a lot more complex. And Frank didn't make anything better because he went off script, because it's like they workshopped it, they went through everything step by step about what's going to happen. And Frank was like, yeah, like, I support your mom's decision, making it seem like this is solely her decision. I get his perspective on it, because he's the one that wanted to work things out, but it's like, well, you've already kind of showcased that we can't, because there's a deeper level to this where it's like, I don't think it's going to be something we can necessarily work out. When you look at being with me, being like, why is it that being with me is so hard? And I get that, but it shouldn't be that way with any relationship. I mean, relationship could have their hardships, sure, but for her to, I don't want to be seen as something hard that you have to work at. That shouldn't be like, it shouldn't be like that, and I think for her, it's like, in the end, it's going to make us a better family, because us trying to fix what's not necessarily fixable, like, that's just going to cause more problems down the road. And obviously Nico's Sophie's taking this a lot better than Nico is, for one. She's older, but also she's kind of already on her mom's side of things. She kind of was already Frank always got the nicer side of her to some extent, but he got some backlash here and there. After finding out about Felicity, which I don't know if I called her Felicity last episode or not. I feel like sometimes I might call her Felicia or something. I don't remember. But either way, because of that, I think she kind of has no love lost when it comes to her dad, so it's just kind of like, it is what it is. She's old enough to kind of, I mean, this episode mainly focused on Nico's reaction and not necessarily hers. We might see in the long run, but she earlier in the season already kind of dealt with what was going on between her parents, so that was kind of neither here nor there. So, and obviously, Abby wanted to handle things kind of as amicably as possible because for her, it's like, right, I don't want to really get a divorce attorney involved. I want to try and handle this as platonically as possible and try to keep this as like nice as possible. The moment you throw lawyers in there, that's when things get nasty. Yes, they're both lawyers themselves, but it's like, we're also married, so we're going to handle this with kind of like kid gloves about how we'll approach it. Even though you have Harry being like, no, like, let me represent you. But she's like, that's sweet, but for whatever reason, your grandchildren like you, especially Nico, and the last thing I want is him to, have to watch and see his favorite grandfather, like, rip into his dad and kind of be one of the reasons why his family falls apart. It's like, no. And that ends up being, like, sadly at the core of Nico's issues with all of this. He lashes out at his mom. Why didn't you work things out? You could have tried. You weren't trying. It's like, she did try. And this is, and sometimes that is how it is. Like, there is just a point where it's like trying isn't worth it, and it is better in the long run rather than dragging something out where you stay together and it just builds up this resentment, because there's a lot of underlining issues that weren't really kind of dealt with, and they're not recent issues. They've been issues for a while that have just kind of built up, and I think it's something that can't be separated, because it's like, also because she is so in his mind hard about, like, how their relationship and stuff, like being with her is so hard, whereas like, oh, being with Felicity was so easy. Who's to say Frank won't eventually find something else that gets easier? Like, what if being with her gets harder going forward? So even with her sobriety and everything, it was still hard in his book. So that's why I'm like, it's still not going to change things. And it's even sadder too, because later on, like, there's revisions being made on both sides, and ultimately, the lawyer who has a history with Harry I think they went against each other last episode, if I remember correctly. Her advice, she's the one representing Abby at the end of the episode, but it's because Abby feels like all these revisions and stuff like that, Frank is trying to hold it off as long as possible, because it's like, as long as we hold this off, we're never technically divorced, which is interesting because that kind of coincides with Lucy's thing, but we'll get to that in a second. When it comes to Abby, she also won't ever use the D word. She says like, oh, a marriage coming to an end. She refuses. She's not said the word divorce. Is what it is. But I mean, it's the same thing, but her using different words kind of signifies a lot of, like, she is kind of sad about this coming to an end, obviously. So it's both of them kind of being in this weird spot where it's like, even though they're kind of fighting with like a divorce situation, it's still a thing. As long as we're fighting, we're still connected, and it still keeps us connected. So you have to kind of like break free of this cycle that you're in. So she gets a representative, in this lawyer. She even tells Frank at the end, like, oh, you need to get you a lawyer too. And he's like, wait, like the flamethrower? Like, oh, she's the type of person that will kind of torch me. And it's like, right, we just need to handle this. And I'm afraid, and it's probably going to be a little sad, that it will eventually, like, maybe get nasty in court. We have no idea how that's going to play out. I'm sure that's going to be an overarching thing this season, a continuous thing about that. The beginnings of it, the middle ground, like the bad aspect of it, and then like the aftermath. It's going to be interesting, especially because I was kind of touching on it before, but circling back, like, Nico blames himself for this. That's where a lot of those issues stem from. It's because he blames himself, because it's like, it's my fault my parents are getting divorced. I should have never taken I should have never taken that stupid phone. I didn't even like the kid I was hanging out with. But it's like, none of that was on you. To be fair, because this is something that predated you. It was going to come out eventually. If it wasn't now, eventually she would have found out about Frank and Felicity. So it's not on you. The fact is, because this is a grown-up issue, it does affect them, but this is still something between them that they couldn't work out, that they couldn't figure out. And Harry's like, this is the hard part. This is going to be the hardest it is, like, this time right now. But he's kind of like, it's going to all work out in the end, and everyone's going to be happier for it. So I thought that was kind of, nice. Him kind of being like the nice doting grandfather. And he's happy for Daniel, like, oh, you're on a 40 under 40 list. Congratulations. That's going to bring more attention to the firm. But you can tell his main intention right now, aside from the case he's working this episode, is obviously he's focused on Abby's divorce, I mean, maybe because he feels a little... He sees so much of himself in Abby, especially because he wasn't there for much of her life. So for him, he wants to be able to help her, but he doesn't really, I don't think he really knows how. It's like, how do I help you during this situation? Yes, I've been through this, but I'm also like the worst person to kind of give you advice during this situation. I could give you advice as a lawyer, but not as a father and a parent. I want to support you, and Abby sees that, but it's just that awkward thing of like, he just doesn't know how, because he's not the most emotionally intelligent person, but it's just... trying to find that middle ground. I think it will. I mean, Abby and Harry have definitely gotten closer over the course of the series, but I think it is going to be a thing of this whole situation might bring them even closer. We'll see. But speaking of Daniel, trying to put himself out there on the dating apps and stuff, and he goes to the 40 under 40. I believe this character's name was it Martina? Is her name? I think. I'm blanking now. But the moment her and Daniel kind of hit it off, where like she's giving him dating advice, I'm like, okay, they're setting that up to be a ship thing. But I didn't expect it to kind of play out the way it did during the episode. Because she's like giving him advice about where he should go, how he should approach the whole dating situation. It's like, oh, you over here like writing this whole novel? And it's like, yeah, because his date didn't go well because she kind of like pulled the, hey, I have an emergency thing. Like, yeah, you could tell. And he's like, oh, do you want to reschedule? She's like, I'll get in contact with you about it. You're like, yeah, that went super sour. Because you could tell like the date wasn't hitting it off where he's like, oh, I'm this. And you work there. Oh, where do you work? Spencer and Simpson. Oh, cool. You do this. Yeah, I do that. It's like, oh, that's cool. And also, like, the fact that his order was the way it was very, very, like, anally specific. So I can understand that not really rocking with her. But, like I said, he runs into Martina. It turns out the restaurant she recommended was her own. And so I guess that's why, because we never found out why she was on the list. And it was like, yeah, you probably would have known if you actually asked me why I was here when it comes to the whole 40 under 40 thing. Because I was like, in my head I was thinking she was a lawyer, but I'm like, right. Like the 40 under 40 list was just kind of like, oh, like across different fields, people being really, really good in their fields and stuff. So I was like, I just assumed the lawyer, but it's like a 40 under 40 isn't just a lawyer thing. So she's a really good chef and runs her own restaurant. And she hooked Daniel up with a meal that everything he doesn't want, that he would kind of want it removed from the food, is kind of on this dish, and he actually ended up loving it. And I even love later on, he's like, oh, because he's like, this is going to give me like gas, and she's like, yeah, but we should normalize farting, and ended up later on sending him a video of just like animals farting. And it's like, oh, it was sent to me by a friend, and he even said, oh yeah, the date was terrible, it went terribly, but the night was actually really good, he was happy. So I was like, oh, that's super sweet. I'm curious to see where things kind of go on that front. So there's that, and kind of staying in the Svensson family complicated relationship department, we had the whole situation with Lucy, which, going back to what I had said before, where Frank, and even on some level Abby, by not, finalizing everything, by not like kind of going along with you, kind of able to stretch it out. Lucy's the same way, because I love that Abby's mom was like, oh, like we need to kind of get you out there, get those pipes cleared. It's like, all right, and Lucy, let me sign you up with some stuff so I can get you laid. It's like, come on. It's like, I just finalized like the separation papers like 7 seconds ago, Mom, and you already trying to get me out there again. It's like, I don't need my pipes cleared right now, especially with like the Carlinka and Jim of it all case that was happening at the time. She definitely wasn't really about to do all that, because navigating this new field of like online dating and stuff like that, just, it's kind of hard putting yourself out there in that capacity, which Abby will eventually have to. Not have to, but she probably will at some point. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But Lucy was hoping that, right, she hasn't gone to see Maggie. She's given Maggie her space because she thinks, like, as long as I'm not there to come and get my stuff, it doesn't finalize it. It doesn't make it like, oh, this is the end. And so, Abby's mom was like, yeah, maybe Maggie's feeling the same way. So, to go and get her stuff, she shows up at the place because she had let Maggie know, like, hey, can I come get my stuff? And Maggie was like, sure, stop by at 6. And sadly, Lucy was happy. She's like, yeah, okay, that good. That means we're talking. Maybe we'll have an opportunity to talk, because she's hoping to save her marriage. Because she hasn't really taken the steps to do that. Like, have you and Maggie really talked since, like, that FaceTime? And it's like, no. because she wanted to give her space, because it's like, right, if we talk, it might turn into a situation where we are going to get divorced. But then she shows up and finds her friend there, and it's like, oh, so you and Maggie are dating now. She's like, yeah, I don't like labels. It's like, once again, I feel so bad because I jumped down I brought it up last episode. I was jumping down Frank's throat, but I recognize the hypocrisy where, like, because I'm like Lucy more than Frank, so that's why. I don't know, because I felt bad for Abby. It's like, right, like Frank, the way Frank was presented, it was like, right, he was in the right of like, right, you messed up and you're not in a good place. And he had every right to kind of be that way towards Abby. I felt bad for Abby because she was trying her hardest to redeem herself, and it just felt like no one was giving her a chance. So that's why I'm also a little biased against Frank. I recognize that. And I just had, now the Felicity stuff gave me even more reason to be like, oh yeah, fuck Frank. I think I even said the same thing last episode, but it's like, yeah, like Lucy did mess up. She did cheat on her wife, like not once, not twice, multiple times, and kept it going, and then she had an opportunity to tell her the truth and didn't. Once again, it's like her and Frank, there's a lot of parallels, and I'm a lot lighter on Lucy than I am Frank, which I think is, my bias coming out. And I can acknowledge that. So I kind of feel bad for Lucy, but at the same time, it's like, you did cheat on your wife, who is pregnant right now. And so she wants to try and make things right. And I think for her, that's kind of the nail in the coffin of like, yeah, things are over. Like, we are going to head towards, like, because it's like, oh, I came to pick up my stuff. I want to talk to Maggie, but it's like, oh yeah, Maggie left. It's like, when's she coming back? Oh, she'll come back when you leave. So it's like, she kind of sees the writing on the wall. And so like later on when she's about to go surfing with Daniel, him hugging her like that, and her being able to laugh with him about the farting animal videos, I think it was nice, so I thought that was sweet. So that's going to definitely be a bumpy road going forward for both her. It's going to be interesting too, because both of them, like, at different stages of their marriage situation, where it's like, right, we are separating and we're heading towards divorce for Frank and Abby. Lucy and Maggie, it seems like they might be heading that direction, but they haven't like gone through the paperwork process like Frank and Abby have. So we'll see how things kind of turn out on over. Will Maggie, and because even Nico had asked Harry like, oh, what are the chances my parents would get back together? It's like, the statistically unlikely. It happens, it can happen, but in this case it's probably super unlikely. And the same thing for Maggie and Lucy. That's probably because it's like, yeah, if you're back, very much like the Abby and Frank thing, like if you get back together with someone who cheated on you, you can work past that. You can. But it also varies from, there's a lot of variables involved. There's also the whole situation. It depends on the people themselves. But then you also add in the fact that you will always have that in the back of your mind somewhere of like, yeah, what if they're cheating on me? Like, that's always going to be that negative thing in the back of your mind. To be fair, you're always going to carry a little bit of that baggage even into your next relationship of, oh, I was cheated on before. You're going to worry about that some level, but it's going to be different when it's like, hey, I'm with a new person. I'm going to treat them new, even though you might carry some of that baggage with you, versus staying with someone and that baggage always being kind of in the forefront of your mind. Because it's like, hey, you're staying with once again, no shade against anyone who's able to make it work out with someone that cheated on you, and no shade towards anyone that's like, yeah, we're done after you cheat on me. Like I said, it varies from person to person depending on where they are in their life, and like I said, there's a lot of many variables with that. So that's why I'm so interested to see, like I said, we see where Abby and Frank are going, and I'm curious if Lucy and Maggie are going to follow suit, or will their situation play out differently. We'll have to wait and see. And also, we catch up a little bit with Cecil, who is sad to not have Nina back. And it's like, oh, he got a postcard from her about, like, I think she's in Japan. But then, like, you have Jerry saying, like, oh, I got one too. I know she's doing great because I got one from, and you could tell how hurt Cecil was because he thought it was something special. And it's like, well, once again, I don't know. After last episode, I don't know if Nina's aware of how he feels about her. It seemed like she was kind of a little sad, like Cecil kind of like seemed sad, but I don't know if she's just not aware, or maybe she was hoping he'd say something, but he didn't. Who knows? But you kind of feel bad for him. It's definitely going to be interesting to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.